This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's podcast episode 286, and for this episode, we are coming back to a round table style. This round table is going to be on West Coast IPA, and joining me for this episode are three of my favorite and your favorite West Coast IPA brewers. First up, joining me is Kelsey McNair, co-founder, head brewer of North Park Brewing in San Diego, California. Welcome back to the podcast, Kelsey.
Thanks, Jamie. Glad to be here.
You had one of our most popular podcasts of 2021, 2022, and for obvious reasons. Of course, last time we talked, it was on the heels of your silver and bronze medal wins at GABF in 2021 and Juicy IPA and Imperial IPA. And then not long after that, you follow up with a World Beer Cup gold in Minneapolis for American IPA. And then, of course, last year, GABF, after that, 4 medals, a gold, a silver, 2 bronze, all in hoppy categories. New Zealand IPA, Juicy Hazy, American IPA, Imperial IPA. Just an insane performance. I mean, it's so easy to win categories of hoppy beers at GABF. Obviously, that's dripping with sarcasm right there. And of course, the most important thing, you had a Craft Beer and Brewing 2022 Beer of the Year for your California Pils Birdie to Bogey, which also scored a 99. But yeah, it's great to have you back.
Thank you. It is truly a pleasure. Glad to be here.
And of course, and also joining me is Evan Price, co-founder of Green Cheek and Costa Mesa Orange, and now Sunset Beach, California. The empire just keeps growing. Evan, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Evan, of course, you're also no stranger to winning in hoppy categories with World Beer Cup gold, 2 silvers, bronze, 2016, 2018, 2022, GABF gold, silvers, bronze, 2015, 2016, 2018, 2019, and also a Craft Beer and Brewing Beer of the Year in 2021 for
Woo!
It Just Works Cold IPA. Welcome back. And then, of course, last joining us at Kelsey and Evan's request is everybody's favorite West Coast IPA brewer, Vinnie Cilurzo of Russian River Brewing in Windsor and Santa Rosa. Welcome back to the podcast, Vinnie.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I was honored when I got the text or call from you that these guys requested me. I'm the old dog here, and anyone that knows me, Natalie and I are cat people, so I'm the old cat here.
The old cat.
Well, I left it up to these guys, and when they said they wanted to invite you, I was like, "Hey, we'll put the ask out there." And so now we've got a spectrum of experience, and here in West Coast IPA, of course, Vinnie, this is your 4th time joining me on the podcast, and that, in fact, makes you the most frequent brewer guest, putting you one ahead of Neil Fisher.
I was going to call you on this because I heard you on the, not that I'm competitive, but when you had Neil on last, you gave him kudos of like the most. I'm like, no, actually, I've been on 3 times because I did get up and go to the bathroom between the 2 recordings of 1 and 2.
That's true. That's true. You're right. You're right.
I love Neil though. So I just,
and Neil's not competitive about this at all. Not at all.
Man, he loves every moment of it.
Anyway, you are now clearly number 1 with 4 appearances here. Of course, Russian River has won 7 GABF medals in hoppy categories, a whole bunch of World Beer Cup medals, 45 between the 2 competitions as of last count, and also a Craft Beer and Brewing Beer of the Year in 2019 for Intinction Sauvignon Blanc.
Yes.
And by the way, on that competitive thing, my friend Dave calls me Monopoly Vinnie when I get competitive, because apparently I got pretty competitive with Dave once playing Monopoly years ago.
Oh, I get so competitive with Monopoly. I think it's maybe because I'm so bad at it, but like it's the best game in the world when you're winning. The moment it starts going downhill, like you can it's such a slow burn until you finally lose all your money that like, and you know it's happening. It sucks so bad. Like I just want to throw in the towel earlier on.
Vinnie won the freshness battle for this one. We're all drinking 1-day-old Blind Pig right now, and he beat you with the 3-day-old El Dorado from Green Cheek that I have up next to drink here, because that's just how Russian River rolls.
It was the first beer I opened, though, was the El Dorado, because I was rocking a CLS hat today when I was brewing.
Oh,
and
that's awesome.
so it was just like good karma with CLS and whatnot. And I love seeing all the our hop friends from the Northwest and elsewhere. So it was appropriate.
Yeah, that's and that is CLS El Dorado right there, that we used in that beer. That I feel like I haven't had great El Dorado in the past. My friend Alex has been working with CLS for the last year or so, and she did the hop selection for me on some El Dorado because when I couldn't make it up this year. I've been doing this like funny little wine project during the hop harvest season, so trying to work that out has been difficult. But anyway, this was the El Dorado that we've been getting from CLS is finally like this like super fresh like watermelon juice character that Kelsey actually pointed out to me over the weekend when we were hanging out, where I was like, man, there's this melon character. It's not quite cantaloupe. It's not like, say, cucumber. And then he's like, it's watermelon. And I'm like, oh, but it's not that Jolly Rancher watermelon, because I think that character drives me up a wall. Like I don't want that like fake watermelon character. But anyway, I'm tangenting way too hard here.
You're tangenting too soon, Evan. But of course, you talking about it has made me want to pour some for myself, and so now I've got a second glass of El Dorado right here.
Your day one Blind Pig first. You know this.
Fantastic. Yeah, for this panel, of course, we're going to explore the minutia of West Coast IPA, from malt to hops to water and fermentation, and look at the way all three of you guys approach this kind of innovation and moving it forward. First, G&D Chillers is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. They're proud of the cool partnerships they've built over the past 30 years, as G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and reliability with 24/7 service and support. Want to maximize efficiency in your chiller? G&D's micro-channel condensers are designed for less power draw with a lighter weight and a more compact design that uses up to 70% less refrigerant for a lower GWP and lower operating costs. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com or give them a call to discuss your next project. Also, this episode is sponsored by BSG, distributors of TNS hop oils, a revolutionary hop product that gives your beer all the hop intensity with none of the astringency. Make better beer and get more from each turn with less work. Change your brewing game with TNS hop oils. Visit bsgcraftbrewing.com to learn how. I think I want to kick this off. You've got some hop oils right there, Evan, do you?
I mean, I just got the sample pack. I haven't tested them out yet, but you were doing the ad, and I'm like, oh, I actually am planning on doing this tomorrow. Is checking these things out, because I don't know.
Once you come up with some results, please share with the rest of us, because I'd love to know what your experience looks like with those. Let's maybe kick it off with the first question. Let's talk about malt. This past year, and I was talking to Zach from Slice, Evan, he mentioned that one of the tricks he picked up from you is varying base malt based on hop selection. I noticed as I look at Blind Pig now that it is certainly lighter than the inaugural ale Blind Pig that you rebrewed, last year, a couple years ago. There's been an evolution in this world of malt when it comes to West Coast IPA, of pushing in a lot of ways paler and paler, but at the same time also trying to find flavor that can support those hop characters. I don't know who wants to take it first, but let's try to kick this off, and talk about approach to malt. Maybe Kelsey, why don't you start us off as you are thinking about West Coast IPA? How do you start thinking about malt base for, that's going to provide the canvas for this kind of hop character?
I mean, for us, it's a big sort of evolution of the approach to the style, and similarly to how Blind Pig is appears lighter than it once did. When we first opened the brewery, we were using a heavy hand of 2-row base. We used a lot of RAR, and maybe a dash of like C40 or something like that. But and I mentioned this when I did the podcast last time. Really took a look at our approach to the platform we were building for Hazy IPA as a way to kind of remove a lot of the malt flavor and try and lift hops and really just express that. And so, things got worked out of the recipes and ratios. And then eventually we just leaned on a very pale Pilsner malt as a basis and really just kept any of the specialty malts out. And the results speak for themselves. I mean, we really want to put the hop first. And so the malt should just kind of stand in the background and be enough to lift. And so, we'll use any of these lower colored Pilsner malts, but the one that we tend to come back to the most is Weyermann. Extra pale Pilsner malt is my favorite. We've used Gambrinus. We've used, the RAR, what is it? The North Star a little
North
bit.
Star.
Yeah, but the one that tends to make its way into most of our recipes is the extra pale from Weyermann. My favorite.
Yeah, I mean the extract on that malt is always seemingly better for our brewery than almost any other malt. We just made a recipe where we switched it out for the Weyermann extra pale, and I don't know. We ended up with, we have a 25 barrel runoff here at our Orange Brewery, and I think we had like 28 barrels with the same amount of malt that we normally get with 25 barrels. And so, the friability, I feel like on that malt is always really nice, where there's a good crack to it. And I feel like that's probably part of it, because we have a shitty mill, because we're a small craft brewery, and so just a two-roll mill, and so which is embarrassing to still say. We haven't done anything there, but yeah, I feel like I echo a lot with what Kelsey's saying as well. I was originally inspired by English beer when I started making IPA. And let's see, I mean, for me, like, I'm 18, 19 years into this professionally. And the first IPA that I put together was Maris Otter with C60. And I got really excited about these English roots to IPA. I really wanted that, I had the line was always like, yeah, you got to support those hops with that malt, and so once I finally was in a creative role again, when I started at Noble in 2012, I went back to that and started making IPAs with Maris Otter and a little bit and some C60, and I just found myself continuing to bring down the amount of caramel malt, and every time I did it, I liked the beer more. It tastes fresher, I felt like it taste oxidized straight out of the tank with the caramel malt and everything in it. And so, at least for me, I just continued to pull out the C60, and then at a certain point, switched out the Maris Otter for Golden Promise. And then at another point, it was just all right, well, that was a cool switch. Let's try 2-row. And then at a certain point, it was Pilsner malt. And at this point, for at least Green Cheek, I mean, Pilsner malt is, a variety of different Pilsner malts are what we use at a near 100% the majority of the time. I was going through recipes to prepare for this, and And every once in a while, we'll throw in a small amount of dextrin malt. But I couldn't tell you that I actually am able to pick up the difference. Like, personally, like we will see similar attenuation, and whether we add a bag of dextrin malt to this mash bill or not. And so the majority of the time we just don't use anything at all. And I think the malt that I mean, for me, the malt is the thing that just provides the sugar for the fermentation, and I don't want it to get in the way. And so I don't want anything too flavorful. Is kind of just the way that it goes. What about you, Vinny? I would love to well, I want to hear about with Vinny being in this game longer than we have, with especially we just talked about we mentioned the evolution of, say, Blind Pig. How did this go for you, Vinny?
I guess I should open a Blind Pig with my Blind Pig Brewing Company opener from Temecula that says "Swig a Pig" on it.
Yes,
going old school. So, yeah, that it was actually cool that you guys went first, because as you guys were talking, I went and pulled up a Blind Pig recipe connected to our server from home here, and we were using 3% Crystal 40 back in 2008. I pulled a recipe from Ferdinand Court, our old production brewery. So yeah, now there's no crystal malt in Blind Pig, or Pliny for that matter. One of the things that we did was, we have certain IPAs where we're going for a lighter body and everything you guys just said that I don't need to rehash. But when you have brands like Blind Pig and Pliny that have pretty fanatical followings, been around for a long time, really slow to make changes and whatnot. And so when we made those changes over time, so our silo malt is still a 2-row malt, but it's Rahr's craft blend, so it's different. So it's just a little bit darker, but it pretty much allows us to just use that and nothing else. One of the things I like about it too is it's a very strategic blend of I think it's just a Copeland and Synergy, a very focused blend of barley varieties that, we still end up with a high fan content in the end, which in the end equals oxidation. And that's something that never gets talked about with IPAs, is just the huge malt bills that we're, to get 7-8% alcohol. I'm now drinking Hop Fu, which when I opened it, Kelsey, was like, oh my God, it made the whole room smell. It was really amazing. Beautiful aroma. But when you look at a malt COA, those are based on, I believe it's 8 Plato wort. And if your IPA or whatever beer is 16 Plato, you need to double all those numbers. So that fan number is much higher. And so when we look at our malt blend, is one thing we're looking at. It's actually one of the cool things about cold IPA is that you're reducing your fan levels by using rice, albeit you're making the beer lighter, but you should end up with a more shelf-stable beer. But anyways, so over the years, we've switched to this slightly higher color, but it allows us to still have fullness. And Blind Pig is only 6.25% alcohol, so it's somewhat low alcohol compared to 7.5-8% beers. I don't know, Evan, what's the alcohol on the El Dorado beer we're drinking?
7.
You're looking. You should know this. 7.2. I got it before you did. So 6.25 is still much lighter. So we are actually using a little bit of Simpson Best Pale in the beer, but that's not near as full and rich as Maris Otter, and it doesn't have that over the top biscuit bready note to it. And it's one of my favorite malts, Best Pale. So we've kind of evolved from 2-row crystal to this slightly higher color craft blend that Rahr makes. But Pliny is all the the craft blend 2-row, whatever RAR calls it, with 5 or 6% dextrose sugar. So super simple. So again, but even so, that transition, we transitioned from Crystal 40 to a Munich 30. We made the change very, very slow, with the idea to lighten the color and body and whatnot, but also thinking about our customer that probably drinks more Pliny than we do, at the brewery. And I drink every batch of Pliny we make. But that was something with Pliny that we were very, very conscious of, was that the customer and what their expectations is. And, it's come up a lot lately on the podcast here with Jamie, is changing of recipes and whatnot. And like, we're constantly making changes to our recipes. Maybe about 8 months ago, at our weekly Friday manager meeting, Natalie dropped on the manager team, "Hey, I want everyone to say something that they like or about working at Russian River or unique." When it got to our then production manager, he said, "You know what I like is that we don't rest on our laurels, and that like Vinnie," and then he went on to say, like, when my friends ask what it's like to work at Russian River, aside from that Vinnie is very demanding, it was that like, we're always changing our recipes. We're making tweaks. As it goes, you'd be shocked how much we're making tweaks. And so this has always been in our DNA. But one thing I do think about as we've lightened the malt up on these beers is I look at a correlation that we've actually also, we're using more calcium chloride to add a little bit more body and mouthfeel. That when I look back at that Blind Pig, and I pulled up a Pliny recipe back, this is from 2008 from Ferdinand Court, our old production brewery. We weren't using calcium chloride back then in Pig and Pliny, but we do now. And so to add some fullness, but it's a different kind of fullness from water chemistry as opposed to malt.
Yep. Yeah, we're in the same boat as well, where I think, the plaster character of gypsum is not the most pleasant. We use chloride and sulfate in our all Pilsner malt IPAs, but I think it's the chloride that helps fill out the beer. And instead of using caramel malt, a small understanding of water chemistry can get you there, instead of that extra body and weight from that caramel malt.
This kind of goes back to some of the internal emails we had before we started, a couple of days ago when we started talking about this podcast. It was like, what can you learn from hazy beer? Where sometimes hazies have taken chloride to like too far. So, and another thing when I look at when I pulled up these old recipes on the other screen, was like our beers are drier too, which also means we're starting with a lower OG or original Plato, however you want to read it. But one thing that we are messing around with, as I was thinking about this podcast and some things that like nuanced approaches to making IPA that maybe aren't hop related, and that is liquor to grist ratio. And it's such an underutilized, overlooked. I think, were we talking about this, Evan? Maybe 6 or 8 months ago.
Well, so I have to admit something embarrassing about this story that I think is so funny, is that I learned liquor to grain ratio backwards, and it wasn't to where the less water you use in that that liquor to grain ratio, the drier the beer's, or I thought the drier the beer was going to be, and the more water you use, I thought, the more residual sweetness or sugar you're going to left over with. And when we started talking about this, you were like talking about it being an interview question, and I'm like, oh well, yeah, of course it's this, and you're like, well, and you weren't, you were really nice about it, but you like you expect, Vinnie corrected me on this whole thing, but it was so funny that like I had been I'd been going the wrong way for so long and never talked to anybody about it. And then you corrected me, and I was like, ah. And so I absolutely ended up changing liquor to grain ratio on some on different beers, especially like our Helles, and have ended up getting the attenuation that I had been wanting. And it was yeah, I don't know. It's another of the million things that I could admit that I've learned from Vinnie.
It's a really cool tool in a brewer's toolkit that we all often overlook, that a thinner mash, so more water to grain, will give you a drier beer. And you know, I hear from brewers often like, oh, I just want to get my beer drier to have that kind of modern IPA quality, or it can work for any beer. And and it's so overlooked, but it's such a simple little tool. And having that plugged into your brew log spreadsheet, whatever it is you use as a formula, is really, it's a powerful tool, I think, especially in this day and age of quite dry IPA.
Well, I mean, and on top of that, like, I think, you know, when we're looking at hop creep as an example, like if I can get the beer drier before I'm adding hops, then I'm not going to potentially creep so much, because there's not as much residual sweetness there for that creep to go through. And so I think that ends up being another thing to check off the list that just helps lengthen that or shorten that time.
Kelsey, we didn't talk to you about your water chemistry to kind of grain body approach.
Yeah, I've progressively over the last few years really leaned into a very soft water approach to most of the beers we make. And, you know, chloride's always been a piece of the puzzle. I mean, just for context, the water in San Diego is very inconsistent. We get our water brought in from a number of different sources, and our effluent changes, you know, week to week, and your bicarbonate level can double. You know, your calcium levels can be just all over the place. And so, out of the gate, I made the decision that we were going to build water from RO, and so we start with, you know, nothing, and then we're taking it, you know, to wherever we need to get it. Which is not the stout podcast, but boy, does it suck to make stout water with RO. But
yeah,
kind of where we landed with West Coast IPA is, you know, keeping it really soft. Our sulfate to chloride ratio that we're working with now is 2-to-1. But, you know, our total calcium is around 50. And so, you know, total, you know, ppm is really low. We're talking like 100 sulfate, 50 chloride. And I really like soft water beer. I mean, it just drinks really crisp and clean, especially when you're working with these really low-colored malts. You know, just enough sulfate to kind of kick up that, you know, expression of bitterness, keep it sharp. But yeah, it's interesting. I know there's a lot of brewers, you know, moving in the direction of really dry, as we're talking about just now. And I actually like my West Coast IPA finish around, you know, 2.5 Plato. I like a little bit more body to it, personally. And within the absence of a lot of malt flavor, you know, I really want there to be some substance behind it, but it's not necessarily like a malt richness. It's just, there's some fullness that isn't necessarily sweet, but it's just enough to kind of like carry through that expression of, you know, bitter hops and, you know, what we've worked so hard to retain between, you know, late hopping in the kettle and, you know, for us, a very heavy dry hop. You know, we haven't talked about dry hops yet, but I mean, we're generally in the 4 to 5 pounds per barrel in a dry hop for any given West Coast IPA. That's
You can't skip ahead, Kelsey. You can't skip ahead. This is all on the roadmap. Let's talk a little bit more about this. Before we do that, AccuBrew is a game-changing fermentation monitoring system that gives you unprecedented insight into your yeast's health and activity. The AccuBrew sensor mounted through your tank sample port creates a record of sugar conversion, clarity, and temperature for every batch run. Step into the modern era of brewing and get your hands on a system that can help deliver your best brew every batch. Like to improve? So does AccuBrew. Something big is coming. Find out more at accubrew.io. Also at ProBrew, they believe your brewery deserves equipment as unique as the drinks that you craft. That's why their solutions are specifically designed to help brew your beer, not someone else's. From brewing to fermenting to carbonating and can filling, ProBrew's customizable equipment empowers breweries to expand operations at their own pace. For more information, visit www.probrew.com or email contactus@probrew.com to learn exactly how they can take your operations to the next level. ProBrew, brew your beer. And is your brewery making its own ciders, seltzers, and other beverages beyond beer? If you need a central source for fruit flavor, Old Orchard has you covered. Old Orchard supplies flavored craft juice concentrate blends to beverage brands for the production of beer, cider, seltzer, wine, spirits, kombucha, and more. Flavor your lineup and streamline your sourcing by heading to oldorchard.com/brewer. I swear, Kelsey, we'll talk about dry hopping, but you just have to pace these things out. I know our listeners, we're gonna make them hang on to the very end to talk about hops because that's just how we roll with all this.
I hope you edit that out. Like, edit out what he says. I want you to bleep it. I do. Beep,
Yes.
beep, pounds per barrel dry hop.
No, you gotta give them something to listen for. But let's talk a little bit about that finishing gravity, because that is an interesting piece of all this and the way that all of these things express. We've heard Kelsey's take. Evan, where do you like for these West Coast IPAs to finish?
Yeah, I mean, it's another piece of the puzzle to the overall scope of the beer that you're making, right? So, to answer your question directly, like we're in the 1.5 to 1.8 Plato range typically for most West Coasts. I think, we're finding balance in a better spot these days just by bringing down a little bit more of the bitterness on the front end. Historically, oh wait, I was about to talk about hops. Sorry, I don't want to talk about hops yet. But all in all, I think that I like a really dry beer. I like it to be pilsner-like, and that I think is where, like, I don't know, it's this super fresh, yummy, hop-saturated imperial pilsner is kind of like, California IPA to me, and so I think that having that low finishing gravity is what I'm personally after. That sweet mid palate thing that Kelsey has in his beers, which I think even calling it a sweet mid palate is aggressive to call it that, but there's this really nice roundness to Kelsey's beers. I'm doing a side by side right now, and the beer that you all are drinking is an example of something that is very low in bitterness for what we typically do. Just as a reference point, but yeah, I mean, Kelsey, you have a fucking 7.5% West Coast here. Like, you're about to jump into like double IPA here. I mean, Pliny is 8%, and so
it was always designed to be the in between.
I love it.
As it was, and as I built the recipe, it was supposed to be right on the line. Like, it was a homebrew recipe that was supposed to fall into both American IPA and Imperial IPA, and I would literally enter it into both at the same competition, and it wasn't unusual that it would medal first and second. which is ridiculous.
That is awesome. Oh,
Secrets.
man. Humble brag.
Yeah.
I don't do that commercially, FYI.
Not allowed.
No.
Man, I love that. But yeah, that's my answer.
How about you, Vinny? Where's that finishing gravity? And how do
I'm
you
actually
think that
with
impacts?
Kelsey. I often find that in our team, when they listen to this, they'll know exactly what I'm about to say. That when our beers get too dry, I'm saying like we need to get this back to like 2.5, 2.6. That's anything over 2.6 is getting a little too sweet. Under 2.5, and now we are losing body and mouthfeel, and I totally agree with what Kelsey said. So that's our sweet spot there. I don't need to drag through this anymore. And that's my belief, and it's always been there. And I love that little bit of body and mouthfeel, but not anything more than that.
Yeah, I learned that from you, Vinny. Like seriously, all of your all the stuff you shared over the years, I kind of really honed in on one of many details, but that was one of them that I always felt that the balance and the finish of your IPAs was something that was an outlier to what really made the Russian River IPAs kind of, I don't know, stand out in a big way to me.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. I'm humbled to hear that, and you sent a very kind email the other day that made me blush. That's for sure. So
he's so good at that. He's so good at that, Kelsey.
Well, let's say I love this mutual love fest right here, and I'm excited where this is going. Let's talk a little bit about fermentation on this. In broader sense around West Coast IPA, over the last few years, we've watched, every assumption that you could make about fermentation, get completely blown apart. We've now got folks like Bob Coons, in Highland Park, making West Coast IPAs with lager yeast. Of course, you've got cold IPA, which is a little bit of a different approach, similar but different. We've got a whole brand new crop of thiol focused, specially bred yeasts that will drive specific characters. Where even things like your classic kind of Chico Cali Ale yeast can produce different kind of flavor approaches. Let's kind of look at this in a broad sense, and I imagine there's not necessarily just one single approach that you're taking, but all of you being experimental are kind of playing in these fields. You have some things you go back to, but you're also doing some experimentation with some of these things as they're evolving. Let's talk about that, and why don't you kick off the conversation, Kelsey?
Experimentation is something. It's just core to what we do, right? I mean, I'm of the belief that a recipe's never done. We keep iterating and trying new stuff, and so we're as far as yeast goes. It was really like setting into the pandemic conditions, and when we got on this sort of like schedule of trying to get our tank times dialed in, we were using a lot of ALDC to try and combat the effects of hop creep, in packaged beer, but also to just kind of keep our tank times on a reliable schedule. And, when I saw that Berkeley had, diacetyl free Chico, because ALDC is a very expensive product. And I was so stoked to see, that was something that we could experiment with. And, using that yeast, which has become our house yeast for West Coast beer, reliably, we're getting the tank times that we want. If there is any hop creep to be had, we're not having any downstream issues where we've got a packaged beer that suddenly, has a problem. Whereas even before, it's really peculiar. We've had mosaic beers that would end up in a serving tank, and they would be great. And somewhere, 3 weeks post transfer, maybe even 2 weeks post transfer, it's like, how does this have diacetyl now? And for some reason, it seemed very isolated to that hop, and I can't explain it. That was a really cool evolution in what we could use as a tool to, just kind of, make our whole schedule function in a way that it never did before. It just makes a reliable fermentation process for us, and I've really loved using it.
And you haven't seen any impact in terms of generations and function, attenuation, or anything else there?
I did notice that particular strain, and I don't know how they propped it up, for their whatever they're propping up from their mother strain. It does tend to attenuate slightly less than we were seeing with like a BSI Chico or some other yeast labs, white labs or otherwise. But we can deal with attenuation issues in other ways. We can adjust our mash temp. We can do other steps, thinning out our mash, whatever we need to do to make that work. And so those adjustments are just things that we would have to do anyway. But I think as an innovation, it's been great.
How about you, Evan?
We actually haven't played around too much in the yeast side of things for a long time. For me, I'm not looking for yeast character. We have absolutely experimented with the diacetyl-free Chico, and I don't know what if I was off that day or whatever the situation was, but I felt like our results weren't as perfect as I wanted them to be, and so we're still on the ALDC and yeast train, and that's something that that's still been very foolproof for us. We use USO5 or California ale yeast for all of these fermentations of IPA, and I just don't want any yeast character, and so I think that something that's very neutral. It's like the same thing with the malt, right? Where it's like, I don't want the malt to get in the way. I don't want the yeast to get in the way. I don't want anything to get in the way except for the hops. I want the hops to be very much in the way. And so that's the thing that I think that all three of us or all four of us are very excited about whenever we're drinking good West Coast IPA, is that hop expression. And so whatever I can do for anything not to get in the way, the better off I am.
How's that fermentation going for you, Vinnie? I know on your side, you are now blending and mixing even with open fermentation, and getting some interesting results even within across the hoppy beer portfolio. But talk to us about your approach to fermentation there.
I say this with a facetious tongue, but I think hop creep was invented and developed by those that make ALDC. They're making bank on hop creep. Like before hop creep, no one used ALDC, maybe some big industrial brewers. Now it's like, during the pandemic, because I think most of it comes from overseas, we were like stocking extra just as just in case, supply chain, let's not get tripped up. So I say that with a little sarcasm, but
are they in it with the hop growers and their kilning temps and all of those other things?
Yeah, but
it's all just some giant conspiracy.
You have to blame the Hop Quality Group for that, which I was a founding member of, because we were the ones that asked for lower kiln temperatures, and we got it. And then
and
now,
surprisingly, you made strategic investments in ALDC makers 10 years ago.
Yes.
And are now cashing in.
Exactly.
Cashing in.
Yeah. So now,
hashtag beer conspiracy.
One of the things that we did over the years was we lowered our knockout temperature, and maybe our fermentation temperature was set. Like it used to be just knockout at 68 and ferment at 68 with
Right.
Chico and Fahrenheit, and then it became 64 knockout, 68 fermentation temperature, and we've been whittling that down, and I think we're at like 64 or 66 now. And in the pilot brewery,
Yes.
I'm mostly knocking out at 60, fermenting at 62. Again, like I think I mentioned it earlier, like we make very slow, calculated changes to our process because a brand like Pliny that is pretty iconic, and
Yep.
our consumers drink way more of it than I do at home. 8% alcohol beer, it's not what you can just drink every night with dinner. So from a fermentation temperature standpoint, we are a little bit lower, a little bit cleaner, less ester profile. As Evan said, just kind of let the hops just kind of blast through. From a open top standpoint, we have certain brands that we only ferment in open tops, lagers, Belgians, those sort of things. But surprisingly, we ferment a lot of ale, IPA in open tops. And one of the things we see is a much lower pH, and we see much better yeast health, which is kind of typical for open top fermentation. But it carries through. So we'll often blend like 20% open top beer into what we call closed top fermenters, basically beer wort that's fermented in CCT. But we'll see that yeast health carry through with an open top fermentation. And like for homebrewers that are listening to this, you can mimic an open top fermentation by just like, I'm just going to use a carboy. I don't know if anyone ferments in carboys anymore, but let's say you're an old school homebrewer and you are making 5 barrels, knock out 5 barrels of cold wort instead of just putting 5 gallons. Sorry, barrels. Thank you. I'm talking professional brewer. 5 gallons of wort. You can split that over like 2 carboys, and you're pretty much mimicking an open top fermentation. But you'll get a much more dramatic pH drop in the end. Our pH is like 0.1 lower, and that all trickles down into dry hopping. And we've started to talk about hop creep here. If you are experiencing hop creep, one of the worst things you can have is a high pH at the start of your dry hop process, because you don't get as much of a reduction in VDK or diacetyl with a higher pH. So you want to start lower.
What would you consider a high pH versus a low pH in this example?
We start thinking about this at knockout. So we'll be at 5.1 is what we want to be. 5 to 5.1 is our pH going into the fermenter. We'll make additions if we have to, and then maybe we see, whatever happens in the fermenter, you should see a decrease. And an open top fermenter will see more of a drop in pH than we do in a closed top fermenter. Yeast is healthier. Everything's just in a better environment. But then when we get to dry hopping, if we are over, I think our number is 5.3, we'll make a pH adjustment at dry hopping as well. So when we're adding the dry hops to the top of the fermenter, we'll maybe add a little food grade phosphoric acid. And to me, food grade lactic acid is a little obvious, and it's a little fake, if you will. Whereas phosphoric, they'll tell you is a little more coarse, but I think that goes nicely in an IPA. So sometimes we'll actually make.
You mean 4.3, not 5.3, right, in the fermenter?
4.3 sorry, my bad. Yeah, you guys all have to correct me. So, and because the thing is that 4.6 is food safety, or 4.55, somewhere in there. 4.5, 4.6 is food safety. So that's something where the beer industry needs to probably be a little more focused on that. The FDA does technically have jurisdiction over us. And if we have beer over 4.6 and this continue, and there's a lot of breweries who are serving beer over 4.6, that's technically food that's unsafe. And so I think it's something we should be focused on. But so we'll maybe like 4.3 is sort of our number, where if it's above, maybe we'll make an adjustment with food grade phosphoric. But we have this unique system at our Windsor facility with our big brewery, in that we built in on the back of the cones of all the tanks, we have a 2-inch port that we have a portable tank mixer that we can move from tank to tank. So it's really easy for us to add, say, phosphoric acid. Let's say we're at 4.5 pH and we want to get to 4.3, knowing that dry hopping is going to increase the pH.
Yep.
Another interview question when you
yes, love that one.
It is that, and so we can lower the pH from say 4.5 to 4.3, for example, and then we dry hop, and then the dry hop takes it back up to 4.5, but we're still in a good spot. And because the beers get really flabby if they're over, to me personally, if they're over 4.6, and but it can all start at knockout when you're in your whirlpool, and maybe you start making additions there.
Let's talk more about this, but first, from the rotatable pickup tube on Rogue Brewing's pilot brew house to the integrated hopbacks on Sierra Nevada's twin prototyping brew houses, and the 5-barrel pilot system at Russian River that Vinnie told us he brewed on just about weekly for the past year, SS Brewtech has taken technology they invented working with world-renowned industry veterans and made them available to every craft brewer. To learn more about SS Brewtech's innovation list, head on over to ssbrewtech.com. Also, have you heard of Christian Hansen? They're the fermentation experts with over 100 years experience in dairy and wine, and they are now bringing that knowledge of microbes to brewers with their Smart Bev range of frozen liquid yeast and freeze-dried bacteria. This portfolio allows for consistent performance at the brewery and produces a range of high-quality brews. Reimagine what your beer can be. Go to chr-hansen, HANSEN.com to learn more about the Smart Bev line of products. Let's keep that conversation going about pH. Evan and Kelsey, where do you guys lie on that?
The knockout pH, somewhere I settled in on like 5.15. Sometimes it's 5.1, sometimes it's 5.15, but it's like right in that pocket. I've never done any post fermentation or during or pre-dry hop pH adjustments, and the food safety consideration thing has me kind of like a little worried.
Sorry.
No, I mean, but I just looking through some of our logs here, it's not unusual for our West Coast IPAs to end up in like 4.65 to 4.7, and I'd say that's fairly typical. So maybe we're on the higher end of what where we should be. But yeah, I mean, that's usually our dry hop pH. Pre-dry hop ends up being like 4.4-ish. So yeah.
The paper shuffling in the background is Evan looking through brew logs, looking at
Evan's
pH numbers,
nervously checking to see where he is. Yes,
and for all of us, it's the angel devil, and we all have John Mallet on one of our shoulders, going like food safety.
Yeah.
He's so good.
Yeah, but we're in that 7.5% ABV environment. So what are we worried about, really?
One interesting thing when you talk about pH that I think is another like cool tool in the brewer's toolkit is your kettle pH. And it's kind of going backwards because we're working through the process, but like if you lower your pH in the kettle to say to closer to what we're talking about here, so your whole boil is at this number, you're also like getting less utilization and it's less bitter. And whereas a higher pH, let's say you're at, I'm just going to throw out 5.5 in the kettle compared to 5 or 5.1, like you are going to get more utilization more isomerization out of those hops. So you do end up with a more bitter beer. So, I think in general, like pH is something that for all styles is something that really needs to be remembered and focused on, and don't forget to calibrate your pH meters. Those things get out of calibration in a blink.
Yeah.
We calibrate our pH meters every day. So, and even on the pilot brewery at Santa Rosa, Windsor, that's a thing we do every morning if we're brewing, is we recalibrate those handheld pH meters.
We're a little looser. We're once a week, but I totally echo what you're saying, Vinny, with in regards to the hop utilization aspect of the boil. Like, we purposely target certain pHs for different beers for the boil mark in order to either get a better utilization of those hops. So some beers, I purposely want a bitier hop expression, a more bitterness, and so we're going at the high end at 5.4. And other beers we're going on the lower end at say 5.2, or even as low as 5.1 for certain lager styles, in order to not get as much utilization from those hops on purpose, and for some of those lagers and like get fullness. And so I think that there's it's such a great thing to bring up that not a lot of people talk about, that is such a as you say, a tool in the toolkit, where it's just something that people don't talk about.
And especially if you have like 5 IPAs on your board, it's a cool way to differentiate between them, aside from hop varieties. Like we all know the difference between hop varieties, but it's a cool way to say like this one's more bitter, and yet you as a brewer are taking this super technical approach to doing it by just dealing with pH.
I think we've broken the seal on hops now, and we should just segue right into that. Shuffle some more paper, Evan. Exactly.
Oh, dude! By the way, I was checking pHs just so that we're clear, and I'm in Vinny's range. On accident. I couldn't be more proud of myself. That I, I didn't realize this whole thing that you were talking about. But yeah, we're below that 4.6 point on these beers. But I've also, like, to Kelsey's point, we've had beers that are reaching that 4.7 spot, and when it comes to a beer that, say, is finishing really low for a finishing gravity, we're talking about there's so many ways to balance something out. And so for some of our beers that have finished pretty low at, like, say, 1.8 or 1.5, those higher pH beers have actually, like, worked out well for us because they come across a little fuller. And that, there's just so many ways to, balance the thing out.
But you'll tend to see a higher pH with a heavier dry hop load. I don't remember what the exact calculation is. Like, I know there is a calculation for every pound of hops you dry hop with, you gain blah 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 pH. But like it just makes sense that if you dry hop at 5 pounds per barrel, you are going to get a bigger rise in pH, and I just pulled up Pliny the Younger.
That calculation.
Yeah, it's all out there. I don't know. Jamie probably knows it because a lot.
Would that also vary based on the growing region? Like I feel like some of the southern hemisphere hops definitely push those numbers up.
Yeah, I
interesting.
personally don't know that if that's true or not. I mean, I've heard a general number, and again, I can't remember what it is that, you get a 0.1 increase, whatever it is, a pH for every, pound per barrel that you add. But like I just pulled up Pliny the Younger, which is a pretty large dry hop. Although I can't give it a pounds per barrel. What's Sam call it, Jamie? The high density.
HDHC.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Sam from other half.
Yeah, high density hop charge. That Sam's got something there, because now that you've got, like, I know Kelsey, I've listened to your podcast, your Craft Brewing podcast, with the liquid hops that you're adding, and that definitely is a great way to reduce hop creep. But then you've got cryo and all this stuff, and like suddenly we're all mixing it in, and now like 2 pounds per barrel doesn't really mean anything. So I think Sam's got something there, but as I look at, and that's how we deal with Younger, which I think on paper is 5 or 6 pounds per barrel, but there's a lot of cryo and this and that. It's 2.36 pH is what it was at, yesterday, as I look at these numbers from what's in the fermenter now. So
did you say
that's pretty low. It's probably the lowest we've ever had it. What's that? I'm sorry, gravity is 2.36.
Okay.
pH is 4.51. So we're getting close, but we're not like it's still, like reasonable, and there's ways to mitigate some of this flavor profile that comes out flabby and kind of slick on your tongue, which I think all of you have had before.
Yeah. I mean, that, I mean, when it comes to hazy beers, I think that we have had a very, we had a very particular process that we've used on those beers for getting ABV and body and drinkability and everything. But when it comes to West Coast triple IPA, it's impossible. Like, that is such a hard beer to balance well.
My philosophy on those, I don't know, it's interesting. Like, I think the finishing gravity has a lot to do with, Evan ran out of batteries. No, I think the finishing gravity has a lot to do with the balance. Like, if I'm making a West Coast style pale ale, India Pale Ale, a double IPA, or a triple IPA, I kind of like them all to finish at the same gravity. I think that there's something to the bottom end that keeps the balance in check with all those hops that you're piling on. And it's not like, and Evan, we were talking about this the other day. You were talking about how you were kind of like backing off on some dry hops in your pale ales. I've kept those ratios very consistent across all these different styles. And I think that, when you are dry hopping with sort of the same program, at different gravities, the finish is kind of what is the glue that sort of binds it all together, and it really makes the drinking experience much more consistent between the different alcohol ranges. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I think what's interesting is that, like, this conversation about West Coast IPA is not necessarily about hops. We're talking about, things that, like, gravity is your mash temperature, it's your liquor to grist ratio, it's the grains that you pick, and so on and so forth. Like, and I do think that there's so much of that go, and I've always believed that about, West Coast IPA in all the years in brewing this, that there's, you have great selection of hops, whether you do hop selection or you have to buy them on the spot market and you can give or take them, but there's so many other things. And this is a perfect example that you need to think so far outside the box when you're making this beer with a style of beer that's not directly related to hops. I mean, at the end of the day, I know, Jamie, you jokingly say like, hey, let's, string on the hop stuff. But like really 3/4 of this podcast is going to be not about hops, because that's really what makes a great beer.
Vinny, everyone listening to it thinks that they want to learn about the hops. And so this is just our way of, it's like when I, grate carrots and put it into the tomato sauce with my kids with their pasta, and they don't realize that they're eating more vegetables that way. You got to give the kids their vegetables, even if they don't realize that they want it there.
You're a genius, Jamie.
This is what we try to do here. It's what we try to do. Evan, do you have sound back?
So, Jamie, the question you were asking before my headphones went out was what?
Well, we were still talking about finishing gravity on these beers. Kelsey was saying that he ties in finishing gravity across, like, no matter what the ultimate ABV is of the beer, he's hitting a consistent finishing gravity across those. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kelsey. I don't want to be misrepresenting you on this.
Well, I mean, I don't want to say like we nail the 2.5 like every time, but it's kind of in a range. It's somewhere between 2 and 2.5, but the target is usually right around that 2.5 area, and that like I said, it's our West Coast IPA, and that could be 6.5%, that could be 7.5%. But we also shoot for that same finish, in a double IPA, and in a triple IPA, which we don't make those often, but we make one per year. We try and line it up around the time that everybody else is making them, which is usually when Younger is going to drop. And that kind of translates.
Everyone's
got to
make their triple IPA when Younger is going to come out, huh?
I could make our triple IPA. A West Coast. If I made a West Coast triple in the middle of the summer, no one would care at all. But if you tie it with Pliny the Younger, which is still like the most sought after beer ever, it's incredible. Like everyone wants to do their side by sides with Pliny the Younger, and it's like I love doing it because it's such a challenging fermentation. Where you are trying to make this dry, it's a golden barley wine. Is it like this beer that you're making? But then you're trying to make it dry with a fresh hop expression. And so it's kind of an impossible feat. And so I think it's a really like, it's a good challenge that I like getting after, is like every once in a while, just trying to do that West Coast triple.
We do make a little bit of Younger in Santa Rosa, but like 95% of the Younger is made in Windsor now. And now 100% of it goes through the open top fermenters. In 2022 was the first time that we were 100%. I think previous years it was maybe...
That's awesome.
80% open top, 70% year before. And now we're sold because of the fermentation character, the yeast health, the drop in pH that we get compared to a closed top. But the other thing we see with these high alcohol beers is you're kind of blowing off those fusel alcohols as well in the wide, shallow vessel that are a 1-to-1 ratio. I can't pontificate on open top fermenters like Eric Toft can, but go back and find the Eric Toft podcast, because that was like one of the best.
It was incredible
brewing podcasts there is. Yeah, it's just a master class in OTFs, but there is something there, and now we've just bought into this idea of we need to brew high alcohol beers, and we're not a pastry stout, blah, blah, blah kind of brewery. But, like our Imperial Porter, we run through the open tops, and anything we run through anything high alcohol, we want to run through open tops. And we see that with Younger as well. And it's just a flavor thing. And sometimes you can't scientifically put your finger on it. You just say, it's better that way, and just accept it. It's good. I think sometimes as brewers we're too scientific and we overthink it. Like, just go and look at the bucket that's blowing out of your fermenter and just be like, that's magic. That's fermentation happening. It's really cool.
I love your passion for this, Vinny, and it's totally real. In case anyone is wondering, like, every time I go to the brewery in Windsor, the first thing you will route our walk back from the brew house so that we'll walk past the open tops just so we have an excuse to go up the spiral staircase and go look at them. And but even last week, like, you sent me a video, via text of Younger fermenting, just because it had this huge volume of that yeast was coming out. So like, it was amazing how fast it was coming off the top of that fermenter. And the enthusiasm is actually, it's 100% real. None of this is fake. Having said that, let's talk about hops, because that's what people really do want to listen to on this. Let's talk about building, a hop bill.
I feel like this is the conversation every time you talk to an IPA brewer. So I'm totally cutting you off, Jamie. Forgive me. But I feel like the three of us have been in this situation enough times, Vinnie and Kelsey, where a brewer or home brewer comes up to you and they're just like, hey, so I really like this. What hops did you use in that? And you tell them, you can even tell them the exact amounts. You can tell them the blend. You can say, whatever you did. And they really feel like you gave them the keys to the castle. And instead, just like all these other things that we've been talking about today, it's a matter of preference, right? It's a matter of preference on what Vinny does and what Kelsey does and what I do in regards to the body of the beer, the bitterness of the beer, and every little aspect of these decisions that we're making in order to make the beer that we want to drink. And the hop expression is another one of those things. Why do we use the specific hops that we use? Because of the way that I personally like it to smell. That bouquet is what I like, is what I'm after, that hop bouquet. And so it's like, it's just such an interesting sort of question of like, all right, well, do you like Parmesan or do you like Brie? Do you like, you just go through all of the, oh man, if you have that Jasper Hill Harbison, by the way, you cut off the top and it's literally like a cheese dip. Oh my God, let that thing sit out all day to really come up to room temperature. I digress. Anyway, hops.
Vinny, that reminds me, at the Brewers Retreat in May, we do have Janet Fletcher, the author of Cheese and Beer, the book Cheese and Beer, who will be doing a seminar on pairing beer and cheese. And I am really, really excited about that because I am fanatical about both of those things.
I was, it's funny. It's funny you bring this up because I was just thinking about this today, and I was like, I should text Jamie this. So one of our two farmers we work with is a local goat farmer from Petaluma, Asadania cheese, but they make a hard goat cheese like Parmesan to tie in Evan's conversation there. And it's really cool. So like when you were over at our house for the dinner with the Belgians for the Wild Friendship event, like that pasta dish we did, we would have used Asadania hard goat cheese. And it's a really unique way. And I was thinking like it would be cool for Janet to maybe use that because it's a awesome cheese and it ties in to what we do and, them getting grain from us and spent yeast, spent hops. And it's true. Goats eat anything. Cows won't eat hops. Goats will.
Goats will eat anything.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Let's definitely talk more about that and we'll get some of that cheese over to Janet.
Yeah. What is it? A can, a boot, you always like see these like cartoons where the goat is literally eating a boot.
But we all digress.
All right,
Let's talk hops.
We've been talking for a while now, and it's getting fun. So, right, when we talk about hops, we're also not talking about it in a singular way, because all of you use hops in a multifaceted kind of way, and different beers are employing hops in different ways. Of course, Kelsey, you've won in New Zealand IPA using more thiol-focused New Zealand hops. Within West Coast IPA, we see this very broad range. Even you, Vinnie, I saw you use Nectaron and the new Younger, and so even, not resting on laurels, again, trying to figure out how some of these new things work into and how you can build different expressions. So, maybe we'll just start, do you have some broader shorthand in how you think about some of these specific hops and the kinds of beer that they make, and those things that you will use together and some of those things that don't work well together, so that they build, some kind of, maybe more consistent lanes for things to travel in? Evan, you talk a lot. Why don't you start that one off?
Evan, you talk a lot. You're so proud of yourself. That was such a good line. Yeah. I kind of go back a little bit to what I said earlier, where, we're in this really neat space of sorts as brewers, but then for our specific brewery, like, we come out, we don't have any flagships on purpose. We're a small brewery, so we, are able to do that. We have 2 breweries, and between the 2, we make a total of about 4,000 barrels a year, and I think that might be actually a little generous. And so every week we're coming out with 3 to 4 new beers a week, and that means that we have the option, we have the ability to come out with new hop expressions on a weekly basis. And so what does that mean?
But that kind of frequency means a lot of pressure, because you got to keep making new things. Yeah. And that means like a constant focus on innovation. What does that innovative process look like for you?
Well, I think it's exciting, at least for me. I hope it's exciting for the customer. I don't know how that looks, but I love continuing to try to figure out, this sort of perfect hop blend in my own mind. And it's the most messed up thing, Jamie, every year, because you get really excited about a certain hop blend, you get excited about a certain hop, and then the next crop year comes along, and you go to the table, you go through selection, or you get pellets sent to you. I'm a pellet selector myself. That's my personal thing. I want the finished goods. I think that's the way to select. But you go through all of these different things on a yearly basis. You get locked in on certain varietals, and it all changes the next time that the new crop year comes along, where maybe your Citra is hitting a little bit more like Mosaic. Maybe like this lot of Citra that we just got in from our 2022 harvest is much richer than what we've dealt with in the past, where it checks a lot of the boxes, and it doesn't quite hit the citrus mango sort of parts that I'm used to, and instead it's getting more it's a richer, deeper cannabis kind of character to it, with even like a small garlic onion hit, but that ends up blowing off in the beer itself. But long story short is that there's no perfect hop combo, because we're dealing with it's an agricultural product. I was literally exactly what I was about to say, Vinnie. It's an agricultural product that we're all dealing with here, that you're doing a collaboration with a brewery, and they're like, hey, what kind of hop combo do you want to use? And I want to either A, I want to go visit them, or B, I want them to send me like a sample of their hops or something, because figuring out what that should look like is really impossible. And then, as we all know,
Impossible without that direct sensory input of what those actual hops that they're talking about, the sample of that thing is actually smelling like.
Yeah, like I think that there's this funny connection between the grower, the brewer, and the customer, where the grower is trying to make the thing that the brewer wants, the brewer is trying to make the thing that the customer wants. We smell these hops outside of the beer through a rub, and there's some hops that absolutely smell incredible outside of the beer. And my example is always Chinook. Chinook is one of my favorite hops in the world to rub and smell, and I think it's incredible. But the moment I put it in the beer, it doesn't do the thing that I thought it was going to do. And so there is this correlation that is missing, that even though you do a good rub on a hop, doesn't necessarily mean it's a good hop. Like, you actually have to put it in the beer to find out in the end if it's worth a damn or not. And I think that that's one of the hardest conversations to have with some of these hop farmers as well. You did a fantastic job. This smells delicious, but I couldn't tell you why it ended up being extremely lackluster and not doing much in this beer. Sorry, that's my rant.
I think that kind of goes towards to the point that, like, at least for us, when Natalie and I do selection, that we're doing selection to, like, not get some
defects,
crazy off flavor. Yeah,
sure.
We're being very, like, defensive about it, and we're
negative selection versus positive selection.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like, okay, I don't want a big OG bomb, onion garlic bomb. Right. This Centennial just has this really weird, okay, it's off the table. So, and I think, like, because if you think about selection, like, you might, a farmer might have 20, 25 bales for that lot, and you're looking at merely a 1 pound cut out of however many pounds it is. Like, those are like worse than baseball percentages. And and so I that's just how I look at selection. It's like, okay, this is at least putting me in the ballpark. It's the same thing going back to, like, hop creep. We've done a lot of work on seeds, on hop seeds. And if you've ever been to Yakima, or if you Google, Yakima hop farms and see those giant piles of hops, there's no way that pile of hops is homogenized and that the seed content is, like, perfectly homogenous between that. There's going to be pockets of that pile of hops that have more seeds than not, if that farm has seeds, and that's going to trigger more hop creep, and that's one reason why we do see more hop creep, I think, because it's just not a homogenous pile, and I think the flavor can be the same. You can put it into the same bucket.
I love that.
Kelsey, let's talk about what does your creative process look like when it comes to building hop blends in your West Coast IPAs?
Whether it's a collab or not, I usually try to find, like, some sort of I don't know, it's like, if you're writing a song, you're trying to think about, like, the sort of ride that you're going to take through the experience. And so I could go, like, knowing how my hops express, kind of like getting beyond what Evan was talking about. Like, you've gone through the selection process, you brewed with these hops, you know what they do. Trying to bring things into a focus where it's like, maybe there's a counterpoint, and then there's some sort of a, like, big burst of character, and, to put that more into, like, actual characteristics. I might want to bring in, like, something that has some, like, rich cannabis danky, kind of quality, that is also going along with something that's, like, big, bright, tangerine, and trying to create some sort of just layers of contrast, or, like, going very harmonious. It's like these hops all kind of express within the citrusy zone, but they're different enough that, I want to put this one up top and then these two underneath it to really try and like show you this really big expression of citrus, and really it depends on what we're working with. If I'm trying to get, that deep diesel note, I know I can pull that out of my Nectaron that I've got in the cold box right now, and that might be a really nice thing to put underneath something that's got like some really rich, orangey character. The Amarillo that we've got right now that we're working with does have that kind of old school Amarillo vibe where it's, big orange notes, but also has that rich resin kind of undertone. It's all a thought process about, trying to create something that is going to work together. And, I try and put the stone fruity hops together to do that in a way, and the citrusy hops together. And then usually there's some element of a counterpoint note that, creates more interest. And it's kind of thinking along the lines of complicated, not complicated per se, but like a thoughtful execution of culinary. It's just creating flavors that work together and
complementary flavors.
Yeah, and it's really easy to look, and you can thumb through a book of hop descriptors and kind of get a baseline. And I do that still. Like if I'm working with a hop or somebody proposes a hop for a collab that we haven't really messed around with before, I'm like, well, what's it supposed to be like? And it's like, okay, well, that stone fruity thing's probably not going to work with this grass bomb. It's just, so let's not use Galaxy in that beer because I know how much grass I'm going to get off of that. Or if I can pull enough passion fruit out of the Galaxy, then maybe it's just one bag goes into the dry hop out of 6 or however many we're going to use. So, I mean, a lot of theoretical ideas here, but that's generally my approach, is to just kind of think about how things are going to work together and create, kind of the palette of colors that makes the beer.
I love that you use musical metaphors in this because that's something I traffic in frequently. But I'm curious how you reinforce the ideas of what these things are, because again, as Evan has said, these are agricultural products and these change year to year. Understanding what that is that you have in your cold box and exactly how it expresses. Are you then opening bags, each time you get the selection back, or I mean, how do you reinforce that? Because there's a pretty broad range within a single variety based on what state it was grown in, what the farm was that grew it, of what it could actually be. And so understanding what you have and what you are actually working with versus just the idea of what that could or should be, there's a gap there, but you navigate that really well.
Well, I mean, and some of it is theory, right? I mean, because similar to Evan, like we're a very specialty beer focused brewery. We don't have, we have 2 beers that we make every 3 weeks. And then everything else that we make is either kind of like occasionally returns, or it's a one-off, or it's something that is, just, one and done. And by doing that and using our hops that we have, at our disposal, whether we selected them or we've spot bought them, I mean, we learn on the fly. And so, we're putting theory into process, and then what we get out of that beer might not be what our expectation was. But now we know, and then, and that's tasting along the process, because a lot of times early dry hop might be bladed hop, and then we can kind of taste that and pull out of that what we got, within 24 hours, because really that uptake is quick. And then sometimes when we're adding in later dry hops where it might be a blend of hops, I mean, sure, we're not going to learn as much, but we can say, like, we can go back to the pellet and smell it and know at least somewhere where that came from. because, I mean, while it's never like a 1-to-1, there's always volatiles that just go away. There's still something that you can pull from the rub in retrospect and draw some lines to where that was. And so, but yeah, I mean, kind of like circle back on it. It is theory, applying it and then learning and moving on. And there are a lot of times when, I might have a small volume of hops, a variety contracted, with the expectation that it's going to do X, Y, or Z, and then doesn't do that. And, for me, that sucks, but like, I may not end up using very much of what I contracted because I didn't get the results that I was expecting. And that's just a cost of the business that we're in, to decide to not use those hops because they just didn't work. Obviously, we go back to the supplier and tell them that like this lot didn't perform to our expectation. Can we please try something else? And 99% of the time, the vendor is going to say, "Sure, let's try this one instead." And so we do. But yeah, I mean, it's a very learning as we go through the new crop year, new supply.
And I just wanted to add that like everything you just said is the perfect reason why every brewery should have on their, right next to their hop scale, a grinder to grind pellets. Yep, look at that. Evan's holding it up where you can't see it because we're on a podcast, but like, that
it's for hops, I swear.
This
one is for hops.
You have a different one for home.
The one at home's a little different, pal.
But yeah, that grinder can come in handy to just grind a small handful, and it makes for really, really good education for brewery owner and their team. So beyond that, there's so many techniques that go in. Something that I keyed on that Kelsey mentioned was like potentially dumping the cone after 24 hours. I mean, that's something in general that I think probably all of us agree on, that you need to dump the cone within a day to 3 days, depending on what you're making and how you're doing it. I know for us at Russian River, as long as we've been doing this making, IPAs, West Coast IPAs, like that practice of dumping the cone, whether it's on our 5-barrel pilot brewery or on our 75-barrel production brewery, like that's something we're religious about.
You're saying after dry hop, or you're saying after knockout?
So we dump the cone after knockout at 24 hours, roughly somewhere in there. But then after dry hop, we're dumping the cone 24 to 72 hours. So 1 to 3 days, depending what it is. Maybe we're experimenting, but yeah, I think that's because that's also a way to mitigate hop creep. The longer you leave that green matter in the tank, the more you're just going to get those enzymes continually to ferment.
Yeah, we do both for sure. I mean, that 12-hour mark and that 24-hour mark from knockout is for like mercaptan purposes, but then like that after dry hop mark, I mean, we are getting rid of any hops that settle to the bottom of the tank every day. We don't bubble up tanks. We don't recirc tanks. Like we just throw them in through the top and allow them to slowly settle out. But it's so interesting what a simple process theoretically this dry hopping thing is, and how different every single brewer does it. Where I don't know, when you smell those hops coming out of the bottom of the cone and they smell as good as they do still after traveling through your beer, there's a certain amount of like, man, am I getting what I should be getting out of this beer? And I think that's a hard, I don't know, it's a hard thing to put into the drain, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was having technical difficulties while you guys were talking about dumping the cone and some of the mercaptan discussion. But For us, we definitely do that. Like getting any yeast that hits the bottom of the tank out as quickly as possible is something that we do. We've definitely, in our early days, experienced some of those, mercaptan / what I think is kind of an acetaldehyde. It's kind of like pumpkin guts. It's overripe cantaloupe type of flavor. We stopped encountering that when we kept the pressure on our tanks throughout the ride of fermentation basically open. We keep our blow off intact for the entire run effectively. And then we're removing yeast, every day. And I feel like that makes for a really clean beer. But different from what you just said, Evan. I mean, and this about our brewery. Our tanks at my brewery, we've got really high ceilings, and I designed it, kind of putting the tasting room ahead of the brewery in some respects. But our fermenters are all a 3-to-1 aspect ratio, so they're tall, and I feel like we get a pretty lackluster hop expression if we aren't doing some sort of a post dry hop, resuspension. And we do recirculate our tanks, and even our newest tanks have a tangential that port in the upper body designed specifically for recirculating hops. And when we fire up the pump and get that thing going on those tanks, you can actually hear the vortex. I mean, it's pretty intense. And so I feel like that's a positive contributor to what we do. But the recipe formulation that goes into it, because we're whipping up hops, like the polyphenols that we're getting in there, and hop burn that might come along with it, requires extra time, and the amount of biofine that we use is specific to that process. And so there's a lot that comes with it, and every brewery has their own intricacies with how their equipment differs, and just kind of learning how to deal with it. And it's like, I can have your beer where you've literally just dropped the hops in the top and that's it. You get this rat aroma, and I'm like, well, if I do that, it's not going to work, So,
well, we do this. There's this interesting thing that
did he just call you lazy, Evan? I think he just called you lazy.
Well, there's certain ways to say lazy, and I think Kelsey just said it. But of course, I'm joking. But one of the things that I feel like we've learned that is super fun to throw out on this podcast is that there's this hop lily pad that can form on the top of the tank after you dry hop, right? Some people call it the hop float or the boat, or I don't know. I've heard all sorts of different terms for how these hops float on the top of the tank. We've come up with this very simple process that I'm excited about, where we literally will dry hop at the end of a day into the tank, and then we leave the blow off open. The very next morning, after we feel like those hops have sort of gotten wet, we're then putting about 15 pounds of pressure on the tank, closing it up, putting 15 pounds of pressure. We let it sit for 1 hour, and then we open it back up to the blow off. And as a final check, we'll go up to the very top of the tank and just do a quick peek in the dry hop port, and to see if those hops have been pushed in. And every once in a while we're wrong, but 99% of the time, all those hops have been pushed in. And there's this crazy difference between the sample that we were able to pull before that moment and then the sample that we're able to pull after that moment, to where we've literally pushed those hops into the beer. And I think that's been a super easy, low impact thing on the beer, where we don't have to agitate it. We don't have to mess around with, say, head retention or some of these other aspects, and instead it's just like just push it in, you know.
Vinny, how's that look on the Russian River side? I know we've talked about how you you circulate through those tanks in order to improve extraction of the hops. But it's been a couple of years since we had that conversation.
Yeah, I briefly mentioned it earlier. We've got a port on the back of all of our tanks that we have this movable, portable tank mixer. So it's a ball valve on the cone of the tank that we can connect to and then sanitize the rod. And at the end is a flexible stainless steel impeller that you push in, and then you plug it in, turn it on, and it can mix our tanks. So we literally have 2 tank mixers in Windsor that circulate through all the brewery or all the tanks. And so we have this ability to get hop creep started sooner, to have better extraction, kind of like Kelsey was saying with his tanks where he can mix with a pump. It's pretty much the same thing. We just have this portable pump. So I think it goes back to whoever was saying that we're all doing it a little bit different. We find this works for us. I will say that, like, I personally like the flavor profile better on these beers. We're getting a more intense, hop quality to the beer, but I don't think that makes it right or wrong. I just think that, each of us are doing things a little bit different. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that like so much of making West Coast IPA is process, and it's less about, ingredient. Yes, okay, we've gone to lighter malt bills and so on and so forth, but like process is such an important part here. And so, when I look at this, like, I'm just seeing process. That's so much of what we're looking at. And at our level, making 40,000 barrels or wherever, 45,000 barrels, wherever we're at, like, there's so much consistency that we're playing with, because at the end of the day, Pliny the Elder and Blind Pig are like 70% of our production. So, I mean, you empty a tank, what goes in there? That's Pliny again. What goes into fermenter 6? That's Blind Pig. It does make life easy, but it also is a challenge for consistency. And so we're looking for processes that are easy to replicate. And again, I just say these are process driven beers, as most beers are, Belgian beers, lager beers. But I think so often IPAs get looked at as like, oh, just, add the hops and it's going to do its thing. That's not how it is.
Sure. Kelsey, we talked about using, salvo and this kind of flowable hop product and dry hopping, over the last year. We've now got other products like Spectrum that are really built around dry hopping itself. Has your process evolved in any way using some of the other modern hop products that are now available, for this kind of thing?
Not really. I mean, we have used salvo with limited success. We've only used a couple different varieties, and really for a lack of not having incognito equivalent available.
Did I say salvo? I meant incognito.
Yeah, but I mean, like, to bridge off what you said, we have used salvo for that reason. Like, there are certain varieties that we haven't been able to get in an incognito form that we were able to get as salvo, and we tried that.
But you're using some intentional hot side advanced hop products, but you're using them on the cold side. I guess that's the broader piece there. Yeah,
that's kind of turned into something of a house flavor for us with a lot of our beers, and I feel like that's a defining characteristic of some of our IPAs, whether they're West Coast or AZ, or even some of our hoppy lagers are very driven by some of those products. I think there's a concentrated richness that we're able to get by using those. And yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, I still stand by using incognito on the cold side, even though it wasn't designed to do that. I've used Spectrum, which is designed to use on the cold side, and I don't think that, in my experience, Spectrum is better than incognito the way that we're using it. And even like at CBC last year, I went up and tried to talk to several people at the Haas booth, and I don't know, it was just kind of I felt dismissed. Trying to say like, hey, this is how I'm using incognito and I'm having great results. And I just feel like I got, kind of handed around a little bit. And it's just kind of interesting that they, and nothing against Haas, like, obviously, innovative company that made incognito, but like, I think the way we're using it is really great. Like, I love the results. So I would assume they would want to get behind like that. So
it was a funny one when I was out in Atlanta in December. I was having brunch with a brewer friend who works for a large brewery out in Georgia, and we were talking about what's next. And he's like, I hear that they're using these hot side flowable hot products on the cold side. And, I could, and that's a new trend. And like, I think you're right. And you should listen to this podcast episode with Kelsey to hear more about that. And
they're using this.
But that's the next trend.
Kelsey, that's what makes like innovation. I remember at Blind Pig in the mid 90s, like dry hopping at £1 per barrel. And that was innovative back then. And this is what takes us to the next level, and so it's pretty cool. I mean, I just tasted through a whole slew of beers through our podcasts here, and I don't know what the combination is in the standard hop food at 7.5% alcohol DDH, West Coast, but that's still like the aroma is just, it's so captivating, it's so beautiful. So it's really
amazing.
Nice.
So good.
All right, well, let's try to tie a bow on this. If you're to look at your...
We're not 8 hours in. We have 8 more hours, people.
I still got, some Pliny left.
Yeah, let's see. I'm drinking the Coast with the Most currently, and man, Kelsey, this thing is drinking really nice. You have Citra Incognito, Mosaic Cryo, Simcoe. Like, this is just classic blend of hops, of course, with the Holy Trinity, as I like to call it. But then done via new hop products. It's a cool nod to like the Holy Trinity, but then also to this new school Kelsey McNair way of doing it his own way, which I think is like pretty damn cool.
Thanks.
I mean, it smells delicious.
I don't have any Kelsey beers here. They didn't arrive today, unfortunately.
Oh,
refund from FedEx because
I'm crushed. I'll enjoy those this weekend, I'm sure.
That's funny.
Yeah,
that's funny, Jamie,
shipping.
because we had the same thing earlier with Evan, and I got on. I was texting when I was brewing today with our shipping guy. I'm like, call FedEx, see what's going on, and we somehow like strong-armed the FedEx guy to deliver to Green Sheik today.
Oh man, I think Vinnie called on his end, and then we called on our end, and then like no bullshit, the guy showed up in like 10 minutes later, and we're like. It was incredible.
Don't you know we have a
drinking.
craft beer and brewing podcast to do here with these beers?
I don't think you understand the importance of this podcast, sir.
I appreciate all of that. That reminds me. So Vinnie, Nectaron in this Pliny the Younger. Making a statement like that and using a New Zealand or hop in that kind of context is kind of a bold move in this thing that the people have big expectations about. People that fly to Santa Rosa and contribute $5 to $6 million to the local Santa Rosa economy. You will do a fantastic job of of sharing that information of the economic impact out there, because craft beer obviously and clearly is a major economic impactor, in economies around the country, but in particular that. There's a lot of expectations around that. Talk to me. Let's just talk a little bit about how you work in some of these new expressions within the expectations that exist for this kind of now classic.
Yeah, so Simcoe and Amarillo are always the backbone on it, talking about the hops. But when you talk about changes we've made for younger, I think it happened last year, was we did incorporate a pretty good amount of Pilsner malt into it, Gambrinus Pils, that super light color. I think Evan and Kelsey would agree, like super, like almost doesn't even get in the way, as Evan was saying earlier. Just let the hops come through. So there is, it's a mix of now our Silo 2-row and that Gambrinus Pils. But something like Nectaron is something we were messing around with on our 5-barrel pilot brewery, and it just finally, you just hit a point that's like, okay, I feel comfortable having it become a part of the recipe for something like Pliny the Younger that is like super iconic and that people have expectations of. But I also think that it goes back to what Natalie and I often talk about between ourselves, that like you can't, when we talked about it earlier, you can't rest on your laurels, but you also like should almost be like someone wants to have your lunch, in that you need to be one step ahead of, and it's in a competitive nature. I mean that in like the most friendly, comment, that, but someone wants to eat your lunch. Someone wants to be the next Younger. And like, so we want to always try to be better, and don't ever think that what you're doing is good enough. And I do think that that's to some degree why, Blind Pig, Elder, Younger, why they have kind of stayed somewhat relevant when all these young pups like these guys are nipping at our tails, like making awesome beer. But even like, I'm gonna bring Matt into this, because how can you not talk about West Coast IPA and not talk about Matt Brennelson? But like,
literally, it was yes.
No, go ahead. Like, but
no, I mean, I was gonna say the
Matt's
same
praises,
thing.
But at the Invitational last year, I had the Hopnosis, and it was just like rocked my world. And it was like, oh my God, this is the best like new beer I've had in a long time. And they're doing it on scale. And so, and Matt and I are really close friends, and we talk about this. We've talked about this often, that like, it's young brewers like Evan and Kelsey and like Ghost Town in Oakland that are continuing to inspire us and keep us kind of young in a sense. And so we take that same approach with Younger, that we try things and we make little, but they're very subtle and slow and methodical, and because we do honor our consumer and that they do expect something, but I think the fact that there's still a line of people outside our brewery, cross our fingers, hopefully it happens this year again, that because we are trying to do better, and we can learn from stuff like Kelsey's talking about with using hot side products on the cold side and that sort of thing. And it totally reminds me of Blind Pig 1994, pound per barrel dry hop, which now is pedestrian, but at the time it was, or 2 pounds, I think, was the double IPA then, but still, like, that was something revolutionary, and now it's not, but there's always something to be learned.
I mean, I remember I worked at BJ's as my first brewing job in like 2006, and I think we did half a pound per barrel or something like that in the IPA or the pale, and it was like, whoa, man, this is hoppy. And it was such a big deal for all of us, like tasting that fresh beer whenever it was finally in the bright. But that's kind of how things go, right? Like, we all one up each other in a way that is lovingly delicious, and that's kind of okay.
This beautiful, friendly competition to make better and better and better beer, and bringing these different approaches in.
It's hard to get mad at somebody whenever you taste their beer and it's genuinely better than like what you made, like when you do your side by side, either whether it's blind or not, and you just go, you know what, I know what I'm gonna pick, and that's the fun part of this whole thing. And yeah, getting fresh versions of both of your beers today was such a treat. So Vinnie and Kelsey, thanks for sending those over. Those yeah, really nice of you.
Yeah, for sure. Rogue as always.
Lest we let this go too far, I think this is a great place to bring it to a close. G&D Chillers is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. TNS hop oils give your beer all the hop intensity with none of the astringency, and Evan's going to report back on how those samples work out for him. AccuBrew gives brewers like you unprecedented insight into your fermentation process. ProBrew's solutions are specifically designed to help you brew your beer. If you need a central source for fruit flavor, Old Orchard has you covered. SS Brewtech has taken technology they invented working with world-renowned industry veterans like Vinnie and made them available to every craft brewer. Christian Hansen is bringing their knowledge to brewers with their Smart Bev range of frozen liquid yeast and fruit and freeze-dried bacteria. If you are not a subscriber yet to Craft Beer and Brewing, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, become an all-access subscriber. Of course, on beerandbrewing.com, we have some great recipes from all three of you. We've got North Park's Sorta Mostly Dead West Coast IPA. We've got Green Cheek's It Just Works Cold IPA. And we've got a great recipe out there for subscribers of Russian River's Blind Pig Inaugural Ale, the old 1994 recipe for Blind Pig. If you want to see just how far West Coast IPA has come in that time, try bring yourself the 1994 edition of that beer and then making a more modern iteration and trying them
with
back
no
to back.
Simcoe, no Amarillo, no Mosaic,
Yes!
no Citra. I could keep going.
Sorry. Vinnie, what hops were was in that original recipe?
Chinook, Cascade, Centennial, but there was no Columbus yet, even there.
Oh, wait, Columbus wasn't even a thing yet.
No.
Oh my God.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah. The evolution of hops is absolutely incredible in my small brewing career, and it's wonderful talking to someone like yourself that's been doing this longer, to where it's just like, because of you, I'm able to use Simcoe. Like, there's certain parts of this that are so mind blowing, and and I don't know. Never mind. I'm done. It's insanely cool, as I was going to say.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vinnie.
Thanks.
If you really want to pay tribute to Vinnie, just start making a beer with Brewer's Gold, okay? That's all you have to do.
Let's leave it at that. I love Brewer's Gold.
And
more to come on
is
that.
growing it for you, aren't they, Vinnie?
We have a little project going with Shelly and Eric and the crew at CLS Farms with some Brewer's Gold, and don't forget that 20% of Citra is Brewer's Gold.
Wait, like an English pale ale? Like, what are you thinking with that with that Brewer's Gold? What kind of beer style?
I can't tell you right now.
Ah, come on.
Sorry, Evan.
There are some secrets left in the world. Amazing. Anyway, thanks to all of you guys for joining me here on the podcast. I appreciate all of your thoughts on brewing West Coast IPA and sharing it out here with the audience. Cheers to all of you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers, Jamie. Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.